I don't know if I'm going to be able to recover from this one. We'd hit rock bottom, and this fight felt different. And I felt like this one might be the one that, causes a divorce.
An honor to have you here. I did a bit of reading into your story, and I see so many similarities there, especially about like your passion for just life and being that example of like, hey, if you were gone tomorrow, what legacy would you leave, and like what evidence would there be of that? So could you start us off by kind of giving us a little bit of that backstory and kind of tell us maybe your no half cake moment, what that was like?
Yeah, yeah. Well, I'll tell you. Yeah, it really kind of starts with 2 points. Number one was the fight, and then the second one was a funeral. These are two of my catalytic turning points, if you will. So the fight is first, and so basically, really, what happened was we were sitting on the couch, me and my wife. It all hit the fan. We were fighting over money, and that morphed into something else. A fight about me not being present and checking out. And if you're married or in a serious relationship, how that kind of goes. And so we, it was we had been married for 3 years, and it was a fight that we got into that I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to recover from this one. We had hit rock bottom, and this fight felt different. And I felt like this one might be the one that, causes a divorce. And, the context of where I was at, I was just recently let go of a position in senior leadership. My career was everything to me. It was my calling, my identity. Everything was wrapped up in it. But I spiraled into depression, and I gained 50 pounds. We were like 100 grand in debt. I was medicating with drugs and alcohol, just kind of trying to like keep my mind straight and sort of cope. And like I said, it was dangerously close to divorce. I was checked out, stressed out, burned out, as I tell people. Um, and I had seen a lot of success professionally in growing organizations and leadership and all that stuff, but I just was plagued with this question of, why do I feel so powerful at work but powerless at home? Why is it that I come home and it seems like I don't have any control? Maybe your listeners would resonate with that feeling. And really what started that spiral of, going back to my childhood, I came up from a dysfunctional upbringing. I had a non-existent relationship with my father. Alcoholism, drugs, crime were littered throughout my family, and I was caught in the middle of it all. And so I knew where I came from, right? And I knew that I wanted something different for my life and my family, but I could feel myself getting pulled back into, the trauma of my childhood and repeating the same mistakes that my family had made. Um, Even when I would yell, like I could hear my dad's voice. I could hear the words that he would say, and I hated it, but it's like I couldn't stop it. I knew I was called to be more. I knew I could be a better man, a better husband and father, but I didn't know what to do or how to do it, right? And so, but I knew that if I was going to break this generational curse and restore my life and restore my marriage, I needed to do something differently, right? All I knew was how to numb myself, with booze, weed, food, my devices, because that was modeled for me growing up. I didn't know how to be a good husband. I didn't know how to be financially successful. I didn't know how to be a good listener. None of those things were modeled. And so business and leadership always made sense to me, but when I got home, I could never quite fit the puzzle pieces together. And it felt like I was two people trapped in the same body, champion at home, champion at work, but I came home and I was a jerk kind of thing. And so really what that culminated to, my turning point, because a lot of people ask me, what was your defining moment? So that was the first one that made me realize like things have to change. The second point was the funeral. And that was, the second part of the story. So I was invited to this funeral of a wealthy philanthropic man, and I had been a pastor in ministry for many years, and I was actually invited to sing at this funeral. And this man was well known for all of his, donations and the amazing life that he had lived, all of his accomplishments. And when the minister was talking to the crowd, he had asked them, he had asked them a question. It was for them, but I was side stage putting on my guitar, getting ready to sing the last song. And he said, "Are you living a life worth imitating? If you were to die tomorrow, would you be proud of the life that you lived?" And as I began to sing that closing song, I could barely choke out the lyrics because all I could think of was that if I walked out of this church and got hit by a bus, I would be confident that nobody would want to imitate my life. If it was my funeral that day, nobody would be saying he inspired me to have an amazing marriage. He inspired me to get into shape. He inspired me to get control of my finances. In fact, they probably would say he struggled and then it was over, you know. And that's the thing about funerals is, people told stories about this man and the life that he lived, and the story was filled of incredible chapters. And that's what people do, right? They tell stories because that's all they have left. So by the time I packed up and left the service, I was determined that I would rewrite my story, because up until that point, one of the chapters of my story was my childhood, which was a sad story. A second chapter of my story was my marriage, and up to that point, it was a lot of struggle. But right there and then, I knew that I needed to write a new story, new chapters, not just for me, but for my wife and for my children, to break this generational curse once and for all. So I took ownership, all the good, all the bad, all the ugly, and I decided that I needed to die to the man that I was in order to become the man, the father that I knew I could be, And so I did an audit of every aspect of my life, man, my marriage, my fitness, my mindset. And because I realized if I wanted different results, I'd have to learn how to make different decisions. I'd have to learn how to think differently. So I surrounded myself with a community of men who were doing the things I wanted to do, men who my ceiling was their floor. You understand what I mean? Men that could hold me accountable to the things that I said that I wanted. Honest, raw, real accountability. And within 1.5 years, we paid off over $100,000 of debt. We had completely restored our marriage. I had lost 50 pounds and restored my health and my body. And I was clean and clear of substances and distractions. And I was calm, content, and confident. And basically, man, I just made a commitment to write new chapters every single day, because I realized that I could have all the wealth and the influence in the world, but if I was sitting around the Christmas tree, by myself that Christmas, what's the point of it all? I realized that being a high performer in business means nothing if I wasn't also performing well at home, and so essentially, man, what I started to do was, people would ask me like, well, what's going on, dude? Like how did you do all this? And so I started helping my friends just for free, helping them lose weight, helping them get out of debt, helping them get closer to their wives. And someone had challenged me, said, man, if you really want to make an impact, launch a podcast and start sharing your story. And so I did that. And then that was, about 6 or 7 months into that, that kind of started to blow up. And then I would have people email me or reach out throughout North America and say, hey, would you teach me? Would you coach me? And so I was like, sure, I'll do that too. And I started coaching guys on the principles that I apply to my own life. And the 3 things that I talk about are marriage, mindset, and fitness, right? So I help high-performing men reclaim their home, their health, and their happiness without sacrificing their career success. And so that's kind of what I started to do. And at the end of the day, I made a commitment to do that because I know that my best chance at being the husband, the father that I'm called to be is to surround myself with other men who are doing the same and to devote my life to breaking this generational curse so that my son and my daughter don't have to be raised up in the drugs, the alcohol, the abuse, that I did. They can learn from my story as I rewrite it. Does that make sense? So that's how I got here.
Yeah, no, it does. It makes a lot of sense. And it's an amazing story. And I resonate so much with so much of that one of the questions I want to ask you as a kind of a follow-up there is really in the in-between process of, hey, when you have this realization up until now, right? That's a journey, a growing process to go from, hey, I realize I'm not where I want to be. I've got some work to do. What is the relationship like with your wife during that time to go from, hey, we're on the brink of divorce to now we have an awesome marriage? How did that relationship evolved during that time? Because I have to imagine it probably wasn't smooth and easy. There was probably a lot of like, hey, you've got to prove, hey, I'm this new version of me first, right? Did you have that experience?
Yeah, 100%, man. Because here's what happens in relationships is, and this is true in our relationship with ourselves. You know, trust is broken, right? We make promises, and then we say, it's like the boy who cried wolf. I promise I'm going to do better. I promise I'm going to do better. And then you don't, and then you don't, and you don't, right? And that's because 95% of the decisions we make every single day are subconscious. And so like only 5% of the decisions we make, actually we're consciously making. And so that's why the vast majority of our days happen on autopilot. This is why men get stuck in these cycles of waking up a year later and life still looks the same. This is why we get stuck in these cycles. And so for me, it was a matter of making simple, small promises to her to rebuild that trust, right? To help her regain her confidence in me as a husband, as a father. And I just said, hey, can you give me time? Like, can we commit to, 12 months? And I promise you that I will follow through with my promises. And then the same thing with myself. Just a little bit about self-confidence, because I'm a bit of a brain geek. But when you break promises you make to yourself, well, what happens is, when you say, I'm going to get up at 6 a.m. and go work out, or 5 a.m. and work out, and you don't, now nobody else knows around you, but you know. And so subconsciously what happens is your mind starts to break those promises. And then you start saying to yourself, well, why would anybody else trust you if you can't even trust yourself to follow through? And so your self-confidence erodes. The same things happen in your relationships at work or with your spouse or whatever. And so I, number one, had to take ownership of the promises I broke. And then number two, make a commitment to say, hey, honey, would you stick with me while we work through this? It's going to be tough and it's going to be hard. I'm going to get a therapist and get the help that we need. But could you work with me while I make these small promises to you and to myself? And then I'll keep them. And over time, that confidence in us in this relationship will be restored. And yeah, heck yeah. In the beginning, it was rough, because I mean, she had no reason to trust me, right? At that point, it had been 3 years of broken promises. And so that's one thing that's sort of what it was like, and a commitment that we had to make together, and it was on me then to follow through.
Right. And I think that I love how you shared all that, and kind of what I'm hearing there, and what I'm reminded of is, right, everyone wants to lean on that expression that a wife should submit to her husband. Mm. And I feel like so many people get that part so wrong, where it's this bravado alpha male thing where you think, hey, I'm the husband, I'm the man, you should submit to me because I'm awesome. But rather, hey, if you are genuinely awesome and you're showing up in a loving and caring way, and you are serving and honoring her first, right, then that's where, like, yeah, of course she's going to submit, because you're doing the same thing first. Like, you're leading yourself first in such a clear way that there's evidence of that part. Right? Do you see it the same way?
100%. I mean, if you can't lead your family, if you can't lead yourself, you have no business leading a family or leading a business or leading anything else. I mean, it all starts with self-leadership. That's huge. And so, that whole submission, mutual submit, or that submission thing, I think can get real, the word, people use the word toxic masculinity. I like the word immature masculinity. I think when men lord that over their spouses, I think that's a flawed way of thinking. I see it as a mutual submission. I think it's service to one another, but also, if you want your wife to love you and support you and be led by you, then you have to be a man that's worthy to follow. You know what I mean? But if you're not living a life that's inspirational, well, if you're not like, who wants to follow a leader that they're not inspired by? Who wants to follow a leader that keeps breaking their promises? No one, right?
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's it's very true. And, it's a thing, I'm sure you see it a lot, where I love the idea of immature masculinity. I think that's probably the perfect way to phrase that. You see it all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And when they don't get that immediate respect or whatever it is, then it's a hit to the ego and the pride. And then that whole thing like spirals out of control, where now you've got this dude who's making things even worse. Right. And it's becoming this bigger and bigger problem, oftentimes not being voiced out because men are not typically allowed to have emotions, or they don't have these channels where they can go and talk to another guy and be like, hey, I'm struggling with X, Y, and Z. And then they wind up either just pouring their life into work and abandoning their family, or picking up a vice, or making a more permanent life changing decision, which really sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Because how many of those could be avoided if we just had those conversations?
100%, man. 100%.
Yeah. How old were your kids during this journey for you?
Actually, at that time, we didn't have kids, and the reason why this fight originally happened was because we were talking about having children, and and she had said, "Are you kidding me? I'm not. I'm not going to bring a kid into this marriage, into this life. No kid deserves that kind of exposure, you know." Which was a real wake up call for me. I was like, "What? Is it that bad?" And so that was a big one.
Wow. That's I got to imagine probably in a place of at that point, I imagine ego and pride were probably more prevalent in your day to day, right? I imagine having that conversation is probably like a big hit to your identity and everything else, that you thought you were this successful dude, but right, you're kind of being chopped down at the knees.
Well, 100%, man. And that was the thing that I always wanted to be. I always wanted to become a dad because I wanted to give my future kids something that I didn't have. And I realized real quick that if I didn't get my act together, then that dream would never become a reality, because my own wife didn't trust me enough to even have a conversation about having children, because of the way that I was leading our house at that time. And that was a big shock. What kind of leader, what kind of man lives that way? And those were some of the questions I was asking, right?
Yeah. Well, I think that's, kind of where we get into the thing like we talked about before, we see all the time. You start justifying your value and pegging your success on this other stuff because it's so empty at home, right? But we don't want to face that part. It's really hard to say, hey, right now I'm not showing up excellently as a husband or even to myself, right? But you can kind of just mask it by saying, hey, I made X amount of dollars, or look how nice of a car I have in my driveway. Because I think for men who don't have a true understanding of their identity, I think we don't talk about enough.
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult, right? And for me, that's why I think one of the most important parts is understanding your authentic self first, and like operating in that every day. And I'm curious for you, like, do you see that same sort of thing as a real tipping point for men who really understand their identity, their calling, their purpose? Like, obviously it's a journey and you'll continue to refine that over time. But do you see that as like a really big starting point for people?
Yeah, I think at some point we all got to get shook a little bit, and understand what's the most important thing. And here's the reason why, Jim, is when you think about the way we're wired, okay, as masculine, when we talk about our essence, our masculine essence versus feminine essence, the masculine is motivated and driven by accomplishments, by excellence, by mission, by purpose, all these things. The feminine is driven by nurturing, by relationships, by emotions, all those things. I mean, I use the example often, like if you've ever been to any kind of Super Bowl party or something. That's just generalizing. But where do you see the guys? They're all crowded around the TV, right? Because they're watching the athletes, because the athletes have a strong sense of mission, sense of purpose. They're excellent in what they do. They're accomplishing something great. Then where do you see the women typically? maybe standing around the island, sipping a glass of wine, getting snacks ready, nurturing each other's relationships. How are the kids? How's your marriage going? Maybe they're shedding a couple tears, laughing. It's just how they connect. And so understanding our masculine essence is we're actually driven by accomplishing. We're driven by this desire to provide and to do something great and to tangible things, paychecks, cars, trucks, whatever, houses. They are tactical or tangible expressions of us doing something great, quote unquote, if you're listening on audio. And so it's that very thing that gets us trapped in going for the wrong thing, right? And so how do I counter that? I counter that with my clients. There's a lot of things that I'll do, but Napoleon Hill says begin with the end in mind. Stephen Covey from his book 7 Habits of Highly Effective People dedicated a chapter that says begin with the end in mind. And one of the questions I ask my clients at the end of the day is a similar, question to the one that was proposed to me at the funerals. Are you living a life worth imitating? What do you want to be known for? What do you want to be known for? I mean, that's massive. And so I have my clients run through a eulogy exercise, and where they actually they picture they passed away, and they write their eulogy from the words of their spouse, their words from the perspective of their wife, or their perspective of their kids. And then they're like, and I'm like, okay, if your wife's name is Jessica, all right, Jessica's saying this. Michael, or like Jim, for example. Jim was a good man. He was blah, 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 blah. And it gets real visceral real quick, because you start visualizing what matters the most, right? And it really highlights the current man that you are and the man that you want to be, right? And then the thing is the gap in between who you are currently and who you want to become. That's the tension. That's where the anxiety lies. That's where the frustration lies, right? And so basically what we do is that eulogy exercise, and the several other ones, basically draws those two men together and says, what's most important to me? What kind of man do I want to be? What do I want to be known for? How do I want to be remembered? And if you're honest with yourself, 100% of the time, the answer is never, I want to be known for the businesses that I've built, or the amount of, the $10 million of my net worth. It's always like, man, I hope that my kids knew that I loved them. I hope that my wife knew that I loved them. I loved her. I hope that they say that I showed up, and when men are completely honest with themselves, that is what drives them. And so what we do is then we connect that and make tactical, practical goals around that instead of the cars, the business, the careers. Does that make sense? So we begin with the end in mind. We get a real clear picture, and then we reverse engineer.
It does, and I wholeheartedly agree. The question I would ask as a follow-up to that is, if men typically are mission-based, right, where it's easier for us, or we have this inclination to go by the scoreboard, right? Because we can see, hey, we scored a point. Cool. I know I'm making progress. Awesome. Let me keep doing that. It's a little bit more fuzzy when the scoreboard is, hey, am I making an impact on my family, my community, etc.? The stuff that we want spoken at our eulogy, if that's what the scoreboard points are, how do we connect that to, right, scoring points on the daily? Because it's not the car in your driveway, the money in your bank account, right? So it's a little harder to keep score. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's a great question, Jim. I love it, man. And you know what? We talk about this concept of, relational currency, and that you have a balance, if you will, with your spouse, right? Or your kids or whatever. And so when we make mistakes, we make withdrawals, right? When we do great things and we show up and we're present and we love our spouses or we love our kids, we make deposits, right? And essentially at the end of the day, understanding that concept and then having that conversation with our partners or having that conversation with our children and saying, where are we at? Like, are we in debt right now? You know what I mean? Have I been making too many withdrawals and not enough deposits, or do we got a big nest egg saved up? And we're are you feeling loved? Are you feeling appreciated? Are you feeling safe with me? And all those different things. And so for me, it's having that check-in conversation of being like, and at the end of the day, it is a bit of a litmus test of how I'm doing as a husband. But if I'm looking around and my wife is happy and she's saying, no, you're killing it, this is, and then my kids are happy, then those are checks, on the scoreboard. They're scores on the scoreboard kind of thing that can um, help me, I guess, make that more tangible, if you will, because I think it's, at the end of the day, you're right. We do crave um, affirmation, I guess, at the end of the day, right? And for your listeners, you can really break down. So if you're listening to this and you're married in your long-term relationship or whatever, your partner, your wife, has three basic needs: to feel seen, to feel heard, and to feel safe. So if we want to turn it into a game, let's ask ourselves those questions. How am I making my wife feel seen? How am I making my wife feel heard? And how am I making my wife feel safe? And with my kids too, very similar needs. And so having that conversation with them, what does it look like to make you feel more seen? What does it look like to make you feel more heard? What does it look like to make you feel more safe in this relationship? And then of course, each of those three needs have, you can break those down into sub needs and stuff. But at the end of the day, if that can become a checklist for me, you know? And so one question I'll often ask my wife is, how can I love you better? How can I love you better? And you got to have humility to ask that question. You can't ask that question with ego, because you got to be ready to hear whatever it is that she has to say. But those are things that, mile markers, if you will, for me, that I'm like, okay, if I know I'm checking off those needs, and that she's saying, you're killing it. Or she's telling me, you know what, I think you could love me better by just being more present. You've been on your phone a lot and I haven't felt like a priority. Okay, now I've got an actionable plan, right? Now I can do something about this. Does that make sense?
It does. And what it really makes me think of, like, to go on the analogy of the bank account, is, as dumb as this may sound, establishing that you're using the correct routing and account number. Because I think a lot of times, like, what winds up happening is, like, your wife will do X, Y, and Z that she interprets as a sign of affection or a sign of love, but to you, it may not be received in that same way, right? So you're feeling like, hey, I'm not receiving this, even though she's giving it to what she believes. And then that's when you get that frustration where she's like, hey, I'm doing X, Y, and Z. You're frustrated because you're not receiving it. And then it's just like, I think the expression is that frustration comes from unmet needs from uncommunicated desires,
Yeah.
or something along those lines. But that's where I think, like, it's so important to have that relationship where be like, hey, how do you want to be loved? Or even just saying, hey, I want to be loved in X, Y, and Z way. I don't think that there's any shame in saying, I would appreciate if X, Y, and Z. How can I do that for you? Like, I think those regular check-ins, just to make sure, like, that two-factor authentication's on in your bank account and money is moving, right? Otherwise, stuff's getting lost.
Well, yeah, I agree 100%. And really what you're talking about, one of the big tools is love languages, which sounds like you're aware or familiar with. But we talk about your return on your investment. That's how I phrase it. Like, if you're going to make an investment, you better make sure you get a return. So stop making investments that yield no return. So, for example, my wife's love languages are quality time and physical touch. Mine are the complete opposite. Mine are acts of service and words of affirmation. And so when we first got married, literally we got back from our honeymoon, and I got up and I was like, I tell this story all the time because it was one of the first moments I was like, oh, I have some learning to do. I got up and I was like, man, I'm gonna crush it today as a new husband. I got up and I made her favorite breakfast, and cut up the strawberries and the yogurt and all that stuff. I might pat myself on the back the whole time. I go in and I wake her up. I'm like, hey, honey, good morning. Here's breakfast, blah, blah, blah. Walking out. So I'm about to go out, just, start making my breakfast. And then I come back in like maybe 10 minutes later, and the breakfast is still sitting on the end table, cold, And for me, this was an act of service, right? So this is how I wanted to be loved, but I was choosing to love her this way. It doesn't mean anything to her. And I got so frustrated because I'm like, I made all this food for you and you're letting you're scrolling on your phone. Is it not? You know what I mean? Like I was just, and I couldn't understand why I was so agitated. Now, of course, knowing what I know now, the more impactful thing I could have done to get the biggest ROI is to actually just stay laying in bed with her, rub her back, and just have some conversation and give her my attention, right? Because her love language is physical touch and quality time. Making the breakfast meant nothing to her. I was doing that for me because that's what I wanted, right? And so understanding that and living out of that is massive.
Yeah, no, I love that story because I think it is so relatable to so many people, right? Because that's where you wind up being like, then you're frustrated that she didn't respond or receive it in the way that you expected her to receive it.
100%.
Now you're offended. And now this snowballs into this whole other thing where you're fighting all day long over literally nothing.
Yeah.
And it's, how many people have, 10, 15, 20-year relationships of this repeated every single day. And then now that's modeled for your kids, right? That's what, your son is going to emulate and your daughter is going to settle for. And I think that that's such a really important part for people to understand. Like, hey, you're teaching them, you're modeling for them. This is what relationships look like. And I don't think most people really understand the gravity of that until it's too late.
Yeah, absolutely. Real quick too, going back to the love languages, well, a lot of people don't realize is there's a dark side to those love languages as well. Like the vacancy or the negligence of them can cause it to cut even deeper. So, for example, because my love language is words of affirmation, my wife, and she doesn't care about words, she would throw words around, and sometimes they were hurtful, and she'd be like, "Why?" And I'd be like, "Can you rephrase that?" She'd be like, "Why? Why you get so hung up on this word?" Because words mean a lot to me. And when you say hurtful words, they cut me extra deep, right? Or for her, when it's like, when I'm not giving her quality time and I'm on my phone or I'm distracted or whatever, that actually does more damage than say any other thing that where she doesn't have a love language. So I have to understand that, you can also, if you're not active in her love language and you're doing something that opposes that, it can actually cut even deeper.
Right.
And you're talking about kids, our kids have love languages as well, to understand that for your kids to help you love them more deeply in a way that they can receive. So look at what your kids are doing. If they're always bringing you drawings and flowers and rocks from the garden, maybe it's gifts. If they're always wanting to help you around the house or out in the garage or whatever, that might be acts of service. So then how can you love your children in return in their love language, right? But yeah, you're right, man. I mean, we are the blueprint for our kids. Like you said, I know that my son's going to grow up to be a version of me, statistically speaking, right? If we have a daughter, then she's going to grow up to marry a man just like me. She's going to crave the affection of a man that's very similar to me. And so whether she likes it or not, I've seen it all the time in my clients. I see it in my family, my own family. And so we are the blueprint. And that's a sobering question. Like, oftentimes I'll ask.
It also
go ahead.
Presents an issue for the high achieving person, especially when you're so used to getting the thing that you want. Because I've been guilty of this myself. You look at the relationship you have with your kid now at this point, and you're like, man, how can I really intentionally pour in to give them exactly what they need? And now you start overcorrecting rather than kind of just giving them the guardrails to let them be the best version of them. You are really overly hands-on, and you're creating a whole different set of childhood trauma they're going to have to deal with.
Yeah, for sure.
It's a delicate balance. And I think, at least from my experience, I'd love to hear your opinion on this. That's why it's so important for us to kind of break those chains first for ourselves. Because if we are not operating at capacity, right? If we are not living the standard, we don't have room, we don't have margin in our lives to sit and stop and look at the picture your kid drew that they brought to you. Because then it's like, hold on, daddy's busy, show me in 10 minutes. And to you, you're trying to do whatever your emergency is. To your kid, you just crush their world. Right. Mm-hmm. And for us, that's why I think it's so important for us to handle our business and really take it seriously, to show up and live that standard every day, because you're affecting their childhood in ways you can't see and you're not going to see until 10, 15 years from now, when those manifest out on a much larger scale. Do you see it the same way?
Yeah. I mean, absolutely. And you think about the thousands and thousands of memories that you have from being a child, right? And you think about all the good, all the bad, that is enormous. And you are responsible for really cultivating those memories with your children, that vast library of memories. And so you get to decide how do I want my children, what do I want their childhood to look like? I mean, it's in your hands, right? Which is crazy to think about. But that's the reality. And so it's super important, man. And at the end of the day, that's what everybody wants, but it's just, we get stuck. We get so sidetracked. And the great irony of this is we work so hard to create this beautiful life for the family that we love. And so many men end up losing the family that they work so hard to provide for. 7 out of 10 divorces in the United States are initiated by women. That's crazy, and in situations where the wife is a higher earner has an education, then that statistic jumps to 90% of divorces in the U.S. are initiated by women, which is crazy to me. And so what does that tell us? That tells us that we have some work to do. And it's okay. I think it's strength. It's strong and it's wise to say, I want to be the best that I can be. I want the tools, and I need to retool. I need to reskill to be able to lead my home, so that we don't become another statistic. Right.
Right. Yeah. When you look at the stats for all that, right, there's so many statistics, and I don't remember them off the top of my head, but when you look at statistics of kids who grow up in fatherless homes, right? There's the percentage that drop out of school. There's the percentage of drug use. There's a percentage of crime. There's all these percentages that are affected from that. And it's a difficult conversation to have, because immediately then you go to, well, men are more important than women, because why wasn't the woman capable of doing it in the first place? Or then, like, there's all this comparison talk. And I find it so just hurtful to the cause. Ultimately, what you need is a present mother and a present father, right? You can't do it alone, no matter which one you take out, right? We can't undercut the importance of having a father in the home. You can't undercut the importance of a mother. If there was no mother, there would be no kid in the first place. Like, literally, you did one of the most amazing things in the world. You brought life into this world. Like, that's amazing and should be freaking celebrated. Mm-hmm. And I don't think you get enough credit, honestly, for the amazing thing that you did, that now there's this expectation you need to also be chasing careers and doing whatever else. Like, and again, I don't think it's wrong. Hey, if your desire is to go be the CEO of a company, please go and do that. But I don't love the fact that as a society, we've put so much pressure on women to start doing all this other stuff, because we're not glorifying the thing that they did in the first place, which should be enough. Like, hey, you brought a kid into this world successfully and you raised them. That should be way more celebrated in society than it is. But I think we get into this really difficult line to walk where who's more important, right? Is the man more important? Is the wife more important? Like, which one is more important in the relationship? And I think, some of what we're seeing in society now is people, again, overcorrecting to try and prove their worth, mm-hmm. where, whether it's toxic masculinity or immaturity or whatever we want to call it, women have gotten to a point where men have not shown up properly and honored them properly that they are taking into their own hands.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're losing some version of femininity.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you could look at it as, hey, the women are nuts. Or you could look at it as, hey, the men need to show up better. And to me, I'm going to speak for the men. I think the men need to show up better and start honoring their wives and their partners better. And that's how we start to correct this. Do you see that same sort of thing playing out?
Yeah, man, 100%. I feel like you've been like reading my notes or something. Well, here's the thing, man. There is no better or worse because they're so different. The measuring stick is different, right? It's like it's not tomatoes to tomatoes. It's like oranges to chili. You know what I mean? It's like not even the same. You know, going back to the essences, feminine, a child needs the nurturing, loving, emotional characteristics of a mother. The child needs this sense of drive and purpose and mission and excellence and some of these less maybe softer qualities, but they need that too, right? There's a reason why since the beginning of time we've been doing it this way. So no, over the last whatever 100 years we haven't had some crazy enlightenment and now this is the way, this is the new way, feminism and toxic masculinity or whatever you want to call it. um no, we're just getting more and more prideful and more selfish, and it's at the end of the day, for lack of a better phrase, it feels like a giant pissing contest where it's like,
Yeah.
how about we both need each other, so the solution in my opinion is balance. um, it's been working for thousands of years, and so it's not broke. And like going back to those statistics you had mentioned, and I know those because I have them on my website because I'm pretty passionate about it. About 1 in 4 kids will grow up without a father in the home, right? 1 in 4, which is crazy. 63% of youth suicides come from fatherless homes. 90% of homeless and runaway children come from fatherless homes. 85% of kids with behavioral disorders come from fatherless homes. And 71% of high school dropouts come from fatherless homes. Does this say that fathers are more important? No, no one's saying that. It just says that fathers are important, right? So all that to say, 100%, I agree. And there is an issue. This is why I started the Dad Nation movement, because there's a couple other statistics for you. There are 7 million as of 2023, I believe it was. There were 7 million working age men that aren't in the workforce. And a lot of these men are being numbed out and checked out by distractions and medications, right? The average man in the US today spends 2,000 hours per year in front of a screen, escaping reality, right? Since 1995, the number of men with zero friends jumped from 3% to 15%, right? That's crazy. And so what that tells us is that men are feeling isolated, they're feeling alone, they're medicating, they're distracted, they're void of purpose, and they're losing touch with what makes them a man and their sense of purpose. So yeah, man,
Yeah.
in a long-winded way, I agree with you.
I love that. And I mean, I really do love too what you're doing with the whole Dad Nation thing, because I think, how important it is to start having these conversations and doing what you're doing. With like, you're changing generations of families by having these conversations. And that doesn't happen if you didn't decide to do it for yourself first. So I want to give incredible honor to you for making that decision, because I know it's not an easy thing to do. And it's not just like this one-time decision where you're like, hey, let's flip the switch and be done. That's probably 50 to 100 times a day at minimum, where you're making those little micro decisions every single damn day. And even today, like, I'm sure that hasn't changed. It's gotten easier. The feedback loop has gotten smaller, but I'm sure you still struggle with stuff on the daily where you still got to live that standard every day. And I think for you to go out there and do it and show that it's possible to come from X and get to Z, like, that gives a picture of possibility to other men that they can do the same thing. So again, I just want to honor you for doing what you do. It is tremendously important, and I am grateful for you to share this time together.
Oh, thank you, Jim. I really appreciate it, man. And yeah, you're right. Again, nothing, and this is another thing that I talk to clients about, and on my show as well. There is no easy. There is no easy, right? And the sooner that we can understand that and embrace that, the sooner we'll be content. So, for example, having a great marriage is hard. Going through a divorce is hard. Being in great shape is hard. Being overweight is hard. Having a lot of friends can be hard. Having no friends is hard. Being rich is hard. Being broke is hard. There actually is no easy, smooth road. Whatever path you choose, there will be difficulty. There will be adversity. And so part of a man, and this is why and I believe this is why we're built to be able to handle pressure, to be able to handle the weight, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally, is because we're created to do this and carry this weight for our families and stop anticipating some easy life that doesn't exist, because you're always chasing a dream that will never come to fruition. So accept it. Stop waiting for it to be easy. Embrace the suck, and then see what happens. You'll be more content. You'll be more happy, and you'll be ready to take on whatever life throws your way. Right. So, yeah.
And I think that there's some muscle memory to it, where if you start intentionally choosing hard first, because like it's going to be hard either way, but when you start intentionally choosing the hard thing first and like leaning into the storm and doing the hard stuff by choice, you build up that muscle where now you're suited for it. And it's much again, it's never going to be easy, right? But it's easier to choose your hard and lean into it by your choice, because then you have control over the destiny a little bit there, right? You're able to choose, hey, which one do I want to deal with? Cool, let me do that and jump into it. I think to what you said before about kind of the quote unquote softening of men in this country over the last 100 plus years, however long it's been, we're leaning away from that. We're letting life dictate, all right, cool, you're just going to get the default option, and the default option usually sucks, right? So I think that there's a lot to be said for leaning in and choosing your hard first.
Yeah, well, there's actually there's a brain structure called, I'm a bit of a brain geek, but the anterior mid-cingulate cortex, which is a brain structure that actually, and this is proven to be true by neurologists, this brain structure actually grows when you specifically and only when you do things that you don't want to do. Okay. And so we know that high performing athletes, people who've experienced a lot of different trauma and overcome it, people have lost a lot of weight. The anterior mid-cingulate cortex is quite a bit larger than people who do whatever they want, whenever they want. And they don't do difficult things that they don't enjoy. Now, what this means for us is that willpower can actually be cultivated. The key to growing your will is doing things you don't want to do. And so actually seeing that anterior mid-cingulate cortex grow larger, that actually is what helps increase your threshold for doing more difficult things, which at the end of the day is where growth comes from. And so the solution, we know, has been proven to just start doing hard things and choosing them, right?
Yeah. Well, again, man, you and I could probably talk for another 6 hours easy on this topic, but I want to honor your time and thank you again for being here. This has been a true pleasure. Where can we learn more about the Dad Nation and you, and kind of support everything you got going on?
Yeah, man. Well, thanks for asking. I help men in 3 different ways, right? So through content, through courses, and coaching. The content is the Dad Nation podcast, YouTube, Instagram, all that. Just literally search Dad Nation Co. You can find it. The courses, I'm creating a course called the High Performance Husband, which really is everything that I teach my one-to-one clients in 3. It's a trilogy in your marriage, your fitness, and your mindset. And then the last thing is coaching. And I do one-to-one coaching for high performing men. And we do cohort coaching as well through something called the Dad Nation Coalition, which is just a small group of like-minded men who are on the same journey. But honestly, Jim, like if your listeners, I'll speak to them. If this has resonated with you today, this is what I do all the time in my coaching practice. So I only work with men so I can get real surgical and strategic. And so if this conversation has resonated with you, Jim, I'll give you all those links I mentioned, but I'll also give you a link to a free strategy call. and they can hop on the call and we can talk about, of all those options, what looks best for you. And I would say, just in the form, if you fill it out, say that you heard from me on the No Half Cakes podcast, and then I'll make sure that I specifically jump on the call with you and not one of my team members, to make sure that I get to know you on a personal level. So that's how you can find me.
Perfect, man. I love that. And again, thank you for being here.
Yeah, you're welcome, Jim. It was great to connect, brother.